Hello everyone, I'm Captain Logan. We've got Dan Torrey here and also Austin the Day Ghost. It's time for another exciting edition of the Comic Vault. It's the sensational, the amazing, and the web of Comic Vault. Today we're going to tackle Spider-Man Life Story, which came out just a couple years ago. So the most recent thing comic-wise I've talked about in a good long time. I have been, everybody be kind. I have not had a chance to really read a lot of comics lately, and I haven't reviewed much even in the last couple of months or so. So really weird getting back to just the medium of comics finally, and I haven't been reading anything current. So it's kind of surreal to me to go to something this recent. So 2019, this is Chip Zdarsky with Mark Bagley. And Dan, we're back talking about Mark Bagley.
We are, yeah. I mean, Bagley's one of those classic Spider-Man artists at this point. I feel like every once in a while he can't stay away. He's always, you know, back and forth coming and doing a Spider-Man project. So, and
he seemed like the perfect choice for this. When I saw his name on the first issue of this, I was like, oh, I wonder if they're going to get like a classic Spider-Man artist or a well-known Spider-Man artist for each issue going through the decades, and was surprised that Bagley was drawing all of it. And if you're going to get one artist to do all of this, at least of folks that are still working and still living, he's probably the guy, right? Because he's done Spider-Man for so many decades. Like, am I right about this? This book spans 6 Spider-Man decades of story, and we'll talk about the premise and synopsis here in a second. But he's worked for at least 4 of those.
Yeah, I don't know when he started.
Does he begin in the 80s? Surely not the 70s.
No, it was either the late 80s, early 90s, I think, when he started working on Spider-Man.
Yeah, I thought early 90s.
Yeah, the 90s was when he hit his like peak popularity, when he was drawing the main books. And then, of course, he did Ultimate with Bendis for a long time. So, you know, that was his kind of second wind with the character. And in my view, kind of established him as one of the definitive artists. I mean, not that the stuff in the 90s he did wasn't great or anything, but Ultimate Spider-Man is special. So
it is, and I think his art absolutely got better at that point.
Yeah.
And some of that might just be time constraints with different projects, because it's hard not to assume that some of the minis and things that he was doing in the 90s, he wasn't kind of rushed on, and Ultimate, maybe he was given a little bit more time and a little bit more leeway, because there are some panels in some of those, like, you know, not so great Venom books that you and I have talked about, Dan, where it's like, how is that so phoned in from Bagley? Oh, I bet he got 9 seconds to draw this book. Like,
yeah, I mean, that first Venom Lethal Protector mini, which he didn't even draw the entire thing, what he did show up to draw of it, there's just like entire pages where it's just like one of those comic book like splash effects with Venom in it, so he doesn't have to draw a background.
Yep. And that's, you just described 90s comics, really? Yeah. But he became notorious for you and I for those yellow backgrounds.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, those yellow, like, flashes with the, like, spiky ridged edge. That was the effect that he would use to cover up the background.
None of that in this book, certainly.
Yeah.
So we've gotten a lot of requests to talk about this, and that's why I thought I would go ahead and select this. Dan was like, hey, I've got more time. Let's start doing some comics again. And this seemed like the appropriate first thing for us to jump back up on, Dan.
Yeah.
And Austin and I usually shoot at the time that we're shooting right now, and he's a Spider-Man guy, and I wanted him with us here too. So Austin, would you mind breaking down a little bit of just what the idea of this book is, what the premise is?
Yeah, well, and also on top of the Spider-Man thing, we have 3 generations of Geekvolution people coming together.
That's true. Good call.
It's a celebration of 3 generations of Geekvolution.
We could have done 6, but I mean, I can't coordinate all of that. And also, we don't have 6 generations, I would argue. There's maybe... At this point, you could maybe actually make that argument, actually.
1,000 generations live in Cap now.
Oh, God.
That was horrifying, Dan.
I don't want to imagine that.
So that makes me the 60s, And that makes Dan, I mean...
Well, I was thinking you're Toby, he's Andrew, and I'm Tom.
Oh, okay, that's better. That's better. Because if we were doing it just by this book, we'd have to pick like 3 of the 6 decades. It's like I'm the 60s, Dan's the 70s, and you're the 2010s. We skipped over the rest of the middle.
Can I at least be the 90s?
No, you're too young! You're too darn young!
Dang.
Austin, what's this book about?
So Spider-Man Life Story is about the life story of Spider-Man. You're welcome. I know, very insightful.
So Dan, what's this book about?
I was getting there. It's about his life story if he aged in real time, and each issue is 1 decade in his life, and you just kind of go through that way. So it's kind of like the Fox X-Men prequels in that way, where you have this one moment in 1 decade, and then you just jump forward a decade and then jump forward a decade, and you just kind of see this window into each decade.
Yeah.
That's a great way to look at it, yeah. And this piece is telling a complete story over the 6 decades, as opposed to just, kind of doing a snapshot of each of these periods and telling a separate story. So these do read sort of like one-shots, but especially thematically and character arc-wise. There is a character arc that Peter Parker is going through from the 60s when he's a young kid who's just gotten out of high school all the way to an 80-year-old man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dan, why don't you get us started and just overall tell us how you felt about this book? I think it's one of the things that I found really interesting about this was the way that it goes through the decades in kind of cherry-picking major Spider-Man stories to be part of this arc that Spider-Man's going through, but also changing things oddly in a lot of places too, here and there. How did you feel about some of the choices of stories that we would pick for each of the decades? Because usually we would try to go to a story that happened in that decade and then make that kind of the main crux of that.
Yeah, I thought the selections were decent. I thought some of the choices made in changing the stories got a little strange. I think that was I in general enjoyed this. I thought it was quite good. I don't think it stands alone super well, but we'll talk about that later on. But I guess perhaps the strangest choice to me is all of the stuff with the Gwen Stacy, Ben Reilly cloning stuff. The way they do the death of Gwen Stacy in this, I thought was the worst choice out of any of the, because they make it so that Miles Warren kidnapped the original Gwen Stacy and kept her in a cryostasis tank, and then put the clone to be Peter's wife with all the same memories, so he had no idea. And we see the Gwen in the stasis pod die, and then after she's dead, Peter learns that was the original Gwen, so he freaks out, and then he holds her and does the pose from the comic book issue, the classic one. And I was just oh, that's a little weird.
And then the clone one kind of just disappears after that.
Yeah. Because they bring Ben Reilly back during the Moreland stuff later on.
Yeah, and she's nowhere to be found, and I was a little bit confused about that, because it seemed like I thought what happened was they ran off to kind of have a life together. And then later on, when we do kind of the second 90s Clone Saga, we've got 6 different major events here. I guess a couple of these issues sort of do 2 at once, right? So, it's more like 8 or 10. And of those 6 to 10 stories, you had to have both Clone Sagas?
Well, yeah.
That was a choice.
I think it's interesting. One of the things that I liked the most about this is how it does sort of thread some of the cool events in the Marvel universe into real world history.
Yeah.
And my favorite choice that they made was having the ideological conflict of the superhero civil war begin with Iron Man and Captain America going to Vietnam
all the way to the Vietnam War. That's awesome.
Yeah, I really liked that Tony Stark is basically the U.S. government's like Dr. Manhattan in this. Like he's leading the people that are like, I won't, the Americans need to win the war, and then Captain America kind of goes rogue because he gets disillusioned with how the U.S. government is conducting the war. And that's also very similar to what was going on in the 70s in Captain America's comics with like Steve Englehart, and that was like when all the Nomad stuff was happening, when Cap was being completely disillusioned with the Nixon administration in that book and everything. So I liked that he kind of used his knowledge of Marvel history to kind of weave the history of what was going on in the books at the time, publication history-wise, into the real history, and also seed things that would happen and be important later in the book. Like the stuff with Captain America that set up not just the ideological conflict between him and Iron Man, but also his relationship with Peter is paid off later in the book, and I think a great way. So that was my favorite thing about it, I guess. Some of those real world history interweaving with his knowledge of the publication history of Marvel, I thought was cool.
Well, I like that you mentioned Watchmen because, and I liked that a lot too, Dan. It starts as a historical fiction piece with superheroes, and as it goes along, it more and more becomes an alternate history piece.
Yeah.
Where it doesn't just parallel and go along with what actually happened in the real world, but then it starts changing, like dramatically as it goes along.
Yeah, it applies like real world consequences to the Marvel universe and what's happening.
Yeah, of course, like the 60s, I think the trouble with this really, and me and Austin kind of had this discussion a little bit in text chat when we were talking about it, I think it does suffer a little bit from just being so short. Like the 60th issue, I would have liked, the Vietnam War was obviously a major social thing that, Peter Parker would be dealing with, but it would have been nice to have some stuff about the civil rights movement too, like, what was going on with the Kennedy assassination, like, you know what I mean? Like, there's so many, like, significant historical and cultural events in American culture in the 60s that I think, just focusing on one of them is good because it gave that specific historical touchstone meaning in the story. I think they didn't have to like rush through doing all of these things. I just wish it was longer so we could have gotten more of that, because I thought that was the coolest part of the book.
Yeah, and I also think it suffered narratively because of that, because I found certain characters a lot less sympathetic than they clearly were supposed to be, just because we didn't get enough time to really explore them and spend any time with them. When you're Mary Jane, every time she's on panel, all she does is scream at Peter. I don't like her. There's no way around it. And you get the sense that between the raindrops, they actually got along to some degree, and there was like some happiness in their life too. But all you see is the tragic stuff, and all you see is her being angry. Not just that he's never there with her going off and being Spider-Man, that kind of classic grudge that she has very often with Peter Parker, but also she starts with Peter from a really antagonistic place. It starts with, I resent you for, in my mind, getting Flash Thompson killed. Like, we find out that she already knew that Peter was Spider-Man before he was even going to tell her. She had just figured it out. It was clear to her. And she had all this, like, pent-up aggression about that. And then you don't get anything with those two together until Gwen Stacy dies, and then they decide to get married, and it really reads like they got married because she's just the other girl in his life, and that's it. It's like the last thing you see them talk about before suddenly it's several years later in the next issue in I think the 80s or whatever, and they're married, is Peter throwing this thing in her face where he's like, well, Harry has disappeared and you don't even have to sleep with him anymore. That's like one of the last things he says to her before they're married. I need to see some scenes of them actually like being happy and getting along and get any sense of why he cares about her. And going to a thing that you alluded to earlier, Dan, that's the main reason that I don't think this reads great as a standalone piece.
It doesn't. It definitely relies on your previous knowledge of the character quite a bit, which was fine for me because I'm a Spider-Man weirdo. But for people that aren't, I don't think this reads super well as like an accessible story. I think you kind of have to. It's sort of like an anniversary celebration of the greatest hits of the character in a cool new context. Is the way I would describe it.
And I love that idea, and it's executed well much of the time. But I would argue, Dan, that even for people that are really initiated, that makes it confusing kind of in a different way. Because if it was just greatest hits packaged differently, but it's more or less the same Spider-Man history that we know, he just actually ages over time, then it might be kind of okay that you're not giving us very much context, but you're also changing stuff along the way.
Absolutely.
That was one of my big things. Yeah, was that you have to bring your own history, but we're also changing history, so I can't be entirely sure what's actually in continuity here. And then there's certain things, like you talked about the MJ relationship. There's also no scenes with Otto and Aunt May, who have like a really important relationship in this book, and it's all in between issues.
The only scene you get with them together, she's an imaginary figure from Peter's brain.
You get the like ending of their story.
Mm-hmm. I thought that the absence of most of the supporting cast, except for the two girlfriends, was a little strange. Like, you get some stuff with Aunt May being senile and unable to take care of herself, which I thought all that stuff was pretty interestingly and well handled. I like the idea of Aunt May getting to the point, it just seemed like a realistic thing to do in a story of this sort of grounded nature, as grounded as a superhero thing can be in the real history of the world. I liked that choice because Aunt May has always been drawn like she's 90 since her first appearance. So the fact that character would get that kind of a disease makes sense. Barring that, I mean, I would have liked to have seen more with Jonah or anyone else at the Bugle. Harry Osborn gets a decent amount to do, obviously, because the Goblin Saga sort of weaves in and out of the stuff here.
There is a whole arc there. Certainly it could have used more scenes, but it's complete at least.
Exactly. Yeah, I think Harry and the girlfriends are the supporting cast members that get the most to do. But I just would have liked to have seen the rest of them too, because they're all, obviously very important to Peter's life.
Well, and Jameson in particular was a problem for me because he's established in the 60s issue as if we're going to do some things with him. Like, what's the point of doing anything but going, the typical, J. Jonah Jameson hates me, I'm Spider-Man, he's trying to make everybody think that I'm hurting people instead of trying to save people, slandering me in his newspaper. Instead, we bring up, his funding the Spider Slayers and all of that, and then we never do anything with it, and he's hardly mentioned through the rest of the book until he's dead, and then we just have a mention about how he's died, and it almost would have I wouldn't have been distracted by that if he had just been in the background or not even mentioned. So I'm with you. I would have liked more of that supporting cast as well, but it's even worse to me when you introduce them and then do nothing with them.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think what is here, as far as the dialogue and the characterization of Peter and stuff, I think is very well done. Chip Zdarsky is a writer that I have read his Daredevil run, parts of it which I quite like. I read his Spectacular Spider-Man run and I thought it was dreadful. So I was
interesting.
I was not looking forward to reading this, but I think the Spider-Man that he writes in that book is sort of like Deadpool light, just jokey all the time. There's not really much pathos to the character because it's constantly being undercut by the stakes are constantly being undercut by Peter takes none of this seriously, In this, I felt the exact opposite. I felt like all of the emotional scenes between the characters had some weight and gravitas to them. As much as they can, I think it suffers by trying to adapt some plots that are just shoddy, all the cloning stuff. All of the stuff with that I was not into very much, but the stuff about, for example, Harry and Norman's relationship I found to be really interesting. It's basically their relationship that we see in all other things, but I thought their dynamic and the scenes they had together were really well done. As an example, I guess, you know.
I mean, I think ultimately I liked the idea, like the gimmick or the novelty of taking some of the major stories from each of those decades and trying to weave together better than the execution of it. Like, after reading it, I found myself thinking it might have been better if it was just a complete original story with this idea. It struck me as a very kind of Jeff Loeb sort of book. Or sort of idea anyway, where like
the color series.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of those kinds of things. And if Loeb came in and did the color, and of course there is Spider-Man Blue, but if he did this as a color thing, that's what it would have been. Where it, you know, he would have taken a lot of like classic ideas and, you know, mired it in the nostalgia of the classic periods of those characters, but it would have been a wholly original story. And that's maybe what this should have been. I don't mean to say that Loeb himself could have told this story better. Obviously, Loeb's real dodgy, and there's a lot of his stuff I don't care for. But I think at the end of this, I found myself kind of wishing it was more of that, just because of the execution of it. Like, I liked the idea of trying to weave in, for instance, like Kraven's Last Hunt in this, and the Civil War stuff actually does work quite well, I think.
Yeah, that's the best of it, I think. I think that's because that's the plot that weaves throughout pretty much every issue. And I think it gets the most development, and I think that's why it seems like it's the strongest kind of like subplot that weaves between them. That's just like a superhero plot, and then of course I think the strongest character plot that weaves throughout it is, you know, Peter's relationship with Gwen and Mary Jane, but also Norman and Harry's relationship. Like those are the three sort of character relationships I think that get the most attention. And I think what's here is good. Like for me personally, I wanted more after reading this, and I think that's a good sign in terms of like the strength of the writing. Like I think Zdarsky has really good voices for these characters, and the fact that he chose this premise alone tells me that he really understands why the character is interesting in the first place. I've always said that this is a coming of age story, a character that grows and changes and evolves, and it needs to end. Like this character needs to get old, he needs to have children, and he needs to die, because that's what his story has always been about. And the route Marvel has taken with just sort of keeping him perpetually like in his 20s, that's just, it's not as interesting because you've taken away the main crux of what made those books popular in the first place. So I think he gets the character. I think that's evident by what's here. I just wish it was longer, which I guess is a good sign.
Yeah, but it feels like we have almost... I mean, this isn't fair, because like I said, it is a story from beginning to middle to end, but it does in some ways feel kind of like a proof of concept before it feels like a complete piece. Like, I don't even know if this is the best proper medium for the story he's wanting to tell. So, like, if you want to do this in comics, the best way you could do it, I think it ought to be six issue miniseries as opposed to 6 individual issues. But this would be a killer premise for a prose novel.
It would.
Like, it really ought to be a prose novel. You start in the 60s, you get the present day, and you let it be 45 chapters, 400 pages. Like,
yeah, I agree.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think I found myself frustrated once I thought of that, because, like, I don't want to rewrite the thing, but I kept thinking, like, this is not even in the right medium.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think giving stuff more time to breathe would, like, really help this book. And then I'm also, I don't know if you guys had this, but I wasn't really as keen on the last issue. It kind of felt like, especially, you know, we're setting up his whole family thing, and then we hit the 2010s, so it's like, okay, we got to do Miles and Superior, and we kind of just dropped the whole kids angle, and it's like, okay, now here's Miles, who is like his sidekick because it's Miles, I guess. I don't know, I wish they did something with his kids instead.
Yeah,
it felt really weird to me to just go,
Yeah, they're there in the last issue, but because Miles has the Doc Ock brain, like, he kind of takes center stage towards the end there for sure. Yeah. Like they go in like that space rocket together, like the kid and Miles, and then I don't even know what the kid goes off and does, but then Miles and Peter are together.
Yeah, because the kids appear at the very start for like the first maybe like 2 pages, and then they kind of just leave, and then it's like a Peter and Miles thing. And
they're really just there to say we have this new age of superheroes, and his daughter is Spider-Girl, and she's part of that, and I guess she's a really good superhero, and that's good. Yeah, that's kind of all you get.
Yeah.
And I wish they tied that together a little bit better with like she is his successor instead of okay, here's Miles because Miles is like a 2010s thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, I like some things about the repackaging of it. I like the idea that, just in the way it's interwoven in this story, where you have that sort of second Clone Saga thing, and everybody thinks Spider-Man's dead for a week because Ben Reilly dies, and he's been being Peter Parker and took over his life. And during that week, Miles just happens to have gotten bit by a spider and puts on his costume and tries to take over Spider-Man, and then, oh, whoops, Spider-Man's actually not dead. I guess I'll go work with him. There's this weird line where he's like, where Peter's like, he even called himself Spider-Man for a minute, and I allowed that. And I was thinking, like, oh, is he not anymore? Like, what's he calling himself now? Did that change? I thought that was kind of weird. But I kind of like the repackaging of it. If Miles, has to be there.
Yeah, I quite liked, as far as some of the other character relationships in this that aren't as prominent as some of the other ones that we mentioned before. I quite liked how this story sort of parallels Peter with the other like genius level intellect characters in the movie. He's like mentored by Reed Richards and doesn't really like him very much, and thinks that he's too consumed with his work, and of course in this, Sue did leave him for Namor. They mentioned that, so he doesn't want to become Reed Richards at the same time, and like eventually MJ does leave him in this book, and he kind of parallels that, and Reed and him connect again later on in the story, and then Tony Stark is kind of a corporate rival to him the entire time, and I actually quite liked the scenes of Peter being a business tycoon, at least in this book, because I think Zdarsky's the person I've seen write that premise the best, where Peter's really like trying to take his ethics into account when he's running the company, and like that's not really that good from a business standpoint. And Tony Stark represents like the character, sort of like he describes Norman in the first issue as the ruthless, capitalist sort of character. Because in this, Tony is kind of he's not a heroic version of Tony Stark, really ever. He's kind of a government tool at the beginning, and then just kind of the worst version of Tony Stark that you see once the Civil War stuff doesn't happen.
Well, and that's why the Civil War thing works so well, I think, because we have that from the beginning. We already know that he's that way, and so he doesn't seem out of character here, because...
Exactly.
He's
trying to basically do a hostile takeover of Peter's company from the beginning. Like, once he first, like, starts getting it up and running, he, like, is trying to, take Peter down a peg and stuff.
And I see him as a sympathetic villain in this before I see him as a morally ambiguous hero.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean,
because like he tries to rationalize things. I think there is some part of him that thinks that he's doing the right thing, and it's not just he's corrupted and everything is totally selfish and about himself. Like I think that to some degree he and Captain America are supposed to kind of represent the two sides of the argument that Peter's having with himself throughout the entire book of what kind of responsibility he should have. Because Spider-Man books are about power and responsibility. This is more specifically about priorities of responsibility. And Captain America and Iron Man obviously have two totally opposing priorities of responsibility, and I think by the end of the book, the idea is supposed to be that Peter, while he's trying to decide, do I have a responsibility to the world and the state, or to myself and my family, at the end he has to kind of like try to find that middle, and so that's that's what the self-sacrifice at the end is about. And Austin, I'm with you. I don't know that it plays out as well as it could have. Because I think the idea is supposed to be he saves the world by saving Spider-Man, and Miles Morales is Spider-Man, and so that's that middle ground.
Yeah.
It's fine. I don't know that it quite comes together thematically the way it could have. But anyway, I kind of went to about 3 different topics there from where Dan started, but I just brought up all of that to say that I think Steve and Tony are supposed to kind of be the 2 sides of that argument.
I agree, and I think that stuff at the end played for me decently, just because Peter talks about how he needs to give everything he can to the next generation, in kind of the same way that Steve did for him when he met him for the first time and he was so inspired by him. You know what I mean? That kind of parallel I thought was cool. But
yeah, and I also really appreciate in the latter decades some of the I want to go as far as to say kind of subtle pseudo meta stuff, where we're talking a little bit about the medium of commercial comics and of Marvel Comics now versus what it was in the 60s when this starts. I think it's very intentional that this starts late 60s, not early 60s. I think it's very intentional that, because this whole thing arguably reads to me like
it actually starts in 1964, so it is early 60s.
Okay, but the majority of the major stuff that's going on is the Vietnam stuff and a little bit later. But yeah, no, you're right about that. But I guess the point I was trying to make is I think it's very intentional that we don't deal with Peter Parker in high school in this. Like high school Peter Parker is the like classic general status quo Peter Parker on a like weekly, monthly comic book basis, fighting a bad guy while he's trying to maintain his sense of responsibility. We have 6 decades where we're already past that. So it's like, what do you do with to your point earlier, Dan, what do you do with a modern Spider-Man story where he's actually allowed to change and grow after he's figured that out? I think it's really intentional that we're not in that status quo at all. And I really love stuff like the line, it's kind of throwaway in, I think, like the second to last issue, about how everybody's tired of superheroes fighting each other. Like, we're talking about the medium as much as we're talking about this world, and that stuff's really cool.
I agree. Did you have anything you wanted to say, Austin?
No, I agree. I agree with that about the just the way it looks at the medium and whatnot. That line, because that's from Tony, I think, when he's talking about I think it's the start of the Civil War issue. And Tony I like in this book. I like, as an Iron Man fan, it does suck that I'm just stuck with Civil War Tony. But at the same time, like, it's not an Iron Man book. So it's like whatever. But his relationship with Reed is really interesting. And I like there's that speech that Reed gives where he talks about how they're basically all gods that have to do what they can so they don't like rule over people. And I'm interested because I guess Chip Zdarsky's also doing a Fantastic Four life story book. And I want to know if it's this Fantastic Four or if it's like a different, like, if it's its own thing. But I'm interested to check that out after reading this.
I would be shocked if he's building a continuity with this. I bet that will be completely its own thing. Honestly, that's what I hope it is. I hope it's not related to this at all.
Yeah, for sure. Especially if they're like already separated by the 70s, it would be hard to kind of tie it together.
They could always do the thing they did here, where
they could do the thing,
divorce and get separated for a while, and they reconcile, years later or whatever.
Maybe instead of the decades thing, it's only 4 issues, and each one is just the entire life story of one of the Fantastic Four done in like 30 pages. But yeah, there's no reason not to do this with lots of other characters. Spider-Man is the best starting point and the best character to do it with for all the reasons Dan was talking about earlier, of course. That, like, of everybody in the Marvel Universe, this is that coming-of-age story with a character that really seems like it's intended to have an ending. I mean, it's the opposite of Batman, you know what I mean? Like, Nolan would have loved to have made a Spider-Man movie, right? Like,
yeah.
Like, his Batman, like, you know, grows and changes and dies at the end. Like that's what Spider-Man always should have been, and couldn't have been because it stuck with the medium. And if I didn't feel like, or in the Marvel Universe, and if I didn't feel like we already sort of had some stories enough like this, I'd say Punisher would be the next best place to go, just because that's a character that also doesn't really fit in the Marvel Universe real well with other superheroes.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting character to do it with, especially because Max kind of gives him an ending too. But Max starts when he's like 50, I think. So like that's, you know, like end of his life Punisher.
Did you guys find yourself wondering where the X-Men were this whole book? Because there's a mention of mutants somewhere, and I just thought it was really kind of weird that through 6 decades, Spider-Man never does anything major with the X-Men. Like, that's where obviously, Dan, your civil rights stuff should have come. Like, the X-Men are too important to, like, real world history in the I keep saying MCU in you know the comics continuity, and it's kind of weird that that's not there.
That's being saved for X-Men Life Story.
Oh, sure. Where Spider-Man will get a mention, but not actually show up in the book.
Exactly. Cool. Just like Scorpion in this book.
Yeah. I think it'd be cool if they did something like this with Nick Fury, too. Like, through all the various wars.
Oh, cool, yeah.
History.
Does he still become the Watcher at the end?
Yes, that's how it ends. He is.
I actually like that book a lot. But...
yeah, no, the possibilities are endless for this kind of a concept. There's so many that are coming to mind.
I meant to mention this earlier, Dan, when you were talking about the various, like, real-world histories, or historical events, excuse me, kind of a la X-Men First Class, like Austin mentioned. The coolest of those to me was using, if I'm reading this right, I think this is what was supposedly happening, because they're kind of subtle and almost cryptic about it. I think the idea is supposed to be in the 2000s issue that the linchpin to start the what do you call it? The legislation to register superheroes starts with 9/11.
I don't think so.
Because there is a page where they're making a big deal out of Peter Parker putting on a Spider-Man mask that looks like he's in the middle of 9/11. And I wasn't totally sure if that's what was going on there, but as they're talking about that, they're acting like that is the event that starts the legislation.
I didn't have that
thought. I just thought that was referencing the 9/11 Spider-Man issue.
I thought it was doing both. If I'm right, that's really cool. If not, whatever, but I thought that's what was going on there.
We just needed Doctor Doom to stand over the wreckage crying.
Because I thought the idea was maybe, and I don't mean to read into this too much because they don't talk about this, but I thought maybe the idea was supposed to be that if only we had the superheroes registered, we could have either prevented that or like gotten it cleaned up faster or whatever. Because, like, I thought maybe they were replacing the Stamford thing at the beginning of Civil War with that.
I don't think that's what was going on.
Okay, well, I thought that was cool, but maybe it didn't happen. Whatever.
I think, because they talk about that scene being like the thing that spurred Peter to reconsider coming out of retirement when all the Moreland stuff was happening, and all that stuff was after all of the superhero registration stuff had started, from what I remember.
Yeah, but it was like a flashback thing.
Right, but I don't think they were saying that, like, that event was at all connected to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, maybe not. I don't know. I'm wrong a lot. It's fine. I'm looking at it right now, trying to find what I was picking up on, and I'm not seeing it right now. But anyway,
well, But yeah, you're right, Austin. That was a reference to the 9/11 Spider-Man issue from JMS's run. That's like a really famous one, and it's like a collector's item now. You got to pay a pretty penny to get your hands on one of those issues.
I just want a poster of that Doctor Doom panel. That's all I want.
Okay, so here's what I was talking about. I don't mean to harp on this, but I still think I might be right about it. So, his daughter is talking about that day he put that mask on, and you see that panel that's supposed to look like that one shot that you guys are talking about, and she says, where is it? The world still gets worse. You helped people that day. That's the day she's talking about. They've just shown you the 9/11 panel. But that day also put Stark in power. He drafted your friends with the Superhuman Registration Act. Men and women who'd already given their lives to helping others. I think that's the idea?
Maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
You're right.
That's what I was talking about.
Nice. But yeah, I mean, I thought all that stuff was really cool too. I think the book in like the 80s and the 90s, from what I remember, they didn't do a lot with the historical connections. I feel like the book is sort of front loaded at the beginning and at the end with that sort of stuff. Like you have the 60s issue with Vietnam, the 70s issue obviously still deals with that, and then you got like the discotheque that he goes to where he meets Mary Jane.
It becomes a lot more about the comic events.
Yeah.
After that.
Well, the 80s does some Cold War stuff where all the heroes, because they're kind of the nuclear deterrent, and they leave to do the Secret War stuff. So Russia is like, okay, launch our nukes. And then there's that scene where the Vision catches a nuke, and he's able to divert it, but it still blows up a town, and he like watches everybody die.
And we do connect Kraven's Last Hunt to the Russians taking over thing. Yeah. I also really love the idea, because I just think this is quirky and funny, that when Secret Wars happen, the Beyonder didn't consider bringing any of the Russian superheroes. He just left all of like anybody with superpowers in Russia. He left all of them here. He didn't take any of them with him. It's really his fault that war happened.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's not really said, but I guess like the Cold War, Secret Wars, maybe something there.
You're totally right.
No, definitely. Yeah.
It is. I guess I liked the more specificity of the like first two events, because like, you know, the Vietnam War was a battle in the Cold War as well. In the 80s, we just kind of get like, you know, more nuclear stuff, I guess. Like they could have easily done that stuff with the nukes in the 60s issues too, with the Cuban Missile Crisis or something. You know what I mean?
I can see why you might avoid that, just because X-Men in the movies did that. So like maybe that's why we didn't go there.
Yeah.
But I also because I agree, because I think everything around Vietnam is maybe my favorite thing in this book. Like I love Peter's kind of argument about whether he should fight in Vietnam or not. And I love that like Flash goes to Vietnam because it's what Spider-Man would do.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's what ultimately gets him killed.
Yeah.
I think all that's really great.
And then that makes Spider-Man even more confused as to whether or not he should have gone. Like, I really like this kind of moral ambiguity where by the end of the book, I'm not totally sure what Peter throughout his life should have, like where exactly his priority should have been. Because like with any good Spider-Man thing, there are huge consequences to either direction he goes. Like if he's too mired in his family stuff and he ignores what's happening in the rest of the world and he's only keeping his family safe, there are consequences to that. There are consequences to his family if he does the other thing.
And
he makes go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, and his family makes him aware of those consequences, specifically of protecting them. Like his kids are like, Dad, you need to go out and do something, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because ironically, he's kind of losing touch a little bit by being too much of the family man. Like he's
just chopping wood in the woods, like, and his kids are like, Dad, the world is burning.
He's old man Parker.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just love taking the, with great power comes great responsibility thing and just making it, but that's kind of different depending on who you are and like responsibility to what. Like,
Yeah.
you can kind of go, okay, responsibility to, me with my family or the world as a whole. Like, is my responsibility to fight in Vietnam or is it not? Like, is it to be here and help people?
Well, I think the best piece of writing in this whole thing is real early in that first issue with the Captain America speech, where he says that you can't be just beholden to the world, and that you that kind of, this sounds sappy, but that whole kind of, follow your heart thing, where he's like, I'm going to war because that's what I have to do for myself. Like, I'm following my clear path. I fought in World War II. That was important to me. I need to understand this war. I got to go over there and find out what's even happening. And Peter's priorities for himself have to be different.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very good book.
No, yeah, it was quite well done. I was very impressed with the writing, and Bagley's art in this I thought was very expressive, and managed to still be in his signature style, but I think reminded me more of like a classic Spider-Man look than like from the pre-Bagley eras, I suppose, because Bagley is classic Spider-Man art, but just the way the characters are drawn, I think he invokes some of the like old Romita and Gil Kane, stuff, the way that those books looked in the 60s and in the 70s.
Yeah, it's not exactly like his ultimate work.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can't put my finger on this because there's not like a natural evolution from the 60s to the 2010s as far as the art goes. Like, it is of one style, and yet it doesn't look exactly the same issue to issue. And I don't know if it's just in coloring or like there's something about the look of it that's kind of subtly evolving, where like all of the character face models and stuff are more or less the same. But I feel like the 60s issue to the 2010s issue, it's not exactly the same look.
No, yeah, I think part of that changes when you go through the different decades. Like, obviously, like New York City is going to look different, people are going to dress differently, so I think that helps like mix it up and make each issue feel kind of distinct. I don't think that it goes overboard with the kind of like, look, it's the 70s or it's the 80s kind of, or it's the 90s kind of thing, which I appreciated. But I feel like there were some times where it just felt like, oh, this is just a Spider-Man story kind of thing, rather than being specifically a story about like the 60s or something like that, depending on what part of the story you're in. I can't think of a specific example offhand, but I had that general feeling when I was reading it.
He could have gotten way too cutesy and like over the top with messing with styles and stuff, and I'm kind of glad that he didn't do that. And maybe that's why the Bagley drawing all of it thing is working as well as it is, because it could have gotten really caught up in, okay, in the 60s, this is how we told this is how we made a comic book, and everybody's got to have like thought balloons, and it's got to be really super wordy, and it's got to be explaining all the action that you're seeing on the page. And then when you get to the 70s, there's a little bit less of that, but there's a ridiculous amount of internal monologue, and like it could have done that. And I'm kind of glad it didn't, as much fun as that might have been. Like, it's not cutesy about it. It is in one mode as far as the storytelling goes. Like, he's in vernacular and stuff, I think, working really hard in the 60s issue to make everybody sound like they're in the 60s. And then I think after that, he's kind of done with that. Like, the 70s issue, it didn't feel like he was like trying to insert 70s slang really like he was with the 60s issue. And as it gets closer to present day, it kind of makes sense that you would get less of that. But I think he could have gotten away with playing with vernacular a little bit more, maybe.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think there were a few things in the 70s issue, but you're right. I think especially when like Peter's at the bar talking to Flash in that scene, like he uses a lot of 60s things.
Yeah, and Mary Jane has some stuff too. The only thing I remember in the 70s issue that was really 70s was hey Peter, you need to get out of the Beatles and try disco. Try something new for a change. And then it reminded me that discotheque is spelled with a QU, and I totally forgot that because I never see that word.
One of my
Oh, really? Like, we're still in the 70s in Canada.
Is that right?
So they're really big. But yeah, we just got it last week, actually. We just got the 70s.
Did I see that right on a back cover that there was a disco ball made out of a pumpkin bomb?
Yeah, maybe.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
For like a variant cover, you mean?
I don't know if it was a variant or if it was like the back of an issue, but I saw that somewhere and it was pretty cool looking.
Oh,
I read this digital, so I don't actually know where it was, but
because the 90s variant cover is the best one. I don't know if you guys saw that.
No, what was it?
But it was like super spectacular collector's item. And
that's
it's got
awesome.
All that stuff on it.
You're gonna make me have to collect these now. I didn't have to buy this book until just now.
One of my favorite unchanging things in style across the entire book is the hairstyle of the Osborns, and how you get to see Norman.
And you get to see elderly Osborn with that hairstyle, but it's not orange anymore. You get to see that in gray? I've never seen that before.
It's awesome.
Yeah, he looks like the Vulture, but with that hair.
Yeah.
Dude, 80-year-old creepy Osborn, he is horrifying.
Yeah, no, that scene with them was great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that part's awesome. I also like the physical stuff with Peter in this, where he uses the black suit because he's getting too old.
Yeah,
so it makes it easier. Yeah, so he becomes reliant on it, even though he knows that it's like a symbiote before Reed Richards tells him. And
I also get the sense that he has a little bit more control over it because he's older and more mature when he gets it in the first place. Like, he's able to take, because there's that scene where he's like, oh, I can take it off, and he does, he just takes it off. And, I mean, there's, obviously he gets it back later, but I got the sense that Zdarsky was thinking about, well, how would a, 40 or 50-year-old Peter Parker interact with the symbiote differently than if he got it in his 20s?
Yeah, I mean, him and MJ had a contingency plan for when the symbiote, freaked out. She had that, sonic sound gun.
Because apparently they're a good team, even though I only ever see them screaming at each other.
Well, and she divorced him, right after that happened.
That's true, too. Honestly, I'm sorry. She seems like a horrible human being in this book to me, but... Is that Zdarsky making a statement where he's like, Gwen Stacy is the true Peter Parker love interest, and I'm gonna, throw her under the bus? Because if that's the case, why does he let them... Because don't they get back together again later?
Yeah, they do.
Don't they patch things up? Because her as an elderly woman, she seems fine. But when she's in her 30s, she's terrible. And when she's in her 80s, she's okay. I like her at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, it just sort of relies on your sort of prior knowledge. Like, when you see her in the 70s, she's full, party girl with her guard up, Mary Jane Watson. You know what I mean? And I think that aspect of her character is very interesting. But you only get to see the front when she yells at Peter, and then you don't really know. If you're not a longtime Spider-Man fan, you don't know why she.
You don't know where it comes from.
This is why she puts this front on. Why she's part. You know what I mean?
You don't get any of her background with her parents or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Hey, did you guys think it was weird that Jessica Jones is introduced in the '90s issue?
And she's dating Peter.
I don't know what any of that was about. It seems like most everything in this book shows up when it would have shown up in at least publication history, but that's a Bendis character that's not invented until the mid-2000s, I think. So
yeah, so I don't know about why she shows up there, but I can at least answer the question of why she's dating Peter, which is because, do you guys remember the whole the Sandman issue of the first appearance of Sandman in the Steve Ditko run, where Sandman walks into the school and he's like, give me a diploma.
Yeah.
Vaguely, yeah.
Yeah, in that classroom, one of those kids is Jessica Jones. That's in the Alias run, and there's a whole thing where she's she really likes Spider-Man because of that, because she was in her class and Sandman showed up and then Spider-Man stopped him.
Oh.
So that's tying in that. I don't know why it shows up in the 90s.
Dan, is this a crazy Stan Lee piece of history that you didn't know about?
Well, this is a retroactive thing. Like Bendis said that she was one of those characters. Like,
oh, I thought it was
no. Stan Lee had like a little arrow to one of the kids and was like Jessica Jones alias. You'll find out in like 40 years.
No, I just thought maybe she had a name in that scene, and then Bendis later on stole the name. Oh, so just retroactively was okay.
Yeah. No, that's just part of that.
Like alias. One of the extra people Ditko drew in the background that was a student and said, that one's just Jones.
Dan, it is fine that you didn't know that.
No, I will hold this over.
Your credibility is intact for now.
I'm gonna put a picture of Jessica Jones in that classroom on your tombstone when you die, so that everybody will know that you didn't know that.
Yeah, why does she show up in 1995? I just thought that was a really strange choice because I didn't see a lot of other things like that.
It's very strange to me that like we used Jessica Jones as his rebound girl instead of Felicia Hardy. Like, that's just very strange.
Yeah, or literally anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, Black Cat is one of my favorite Spider-Man love interests, so I would have loved to have seen Felicia, but...
No, I agree, and it would have been nice for it to be, somebody in a costume or, with powers or a superhero kind of person. So, I mean, like, maybe that's why it was Jessica Jones, but why would you avoid Black Cat? And you're right, like, where is she in this?
She's not an entity. She doesn't exist.
Oh.
I mean, at least as far as we know. I mean, who knows?
It's part of the you gotta bring your history in, but also delete certain aspects of it.
Yeah. What do you
it's
guys
a little
think
bit. This is a weird comparison, but it's a little bit like the Boom Power Rangers comics, where they cherry pick like what counts and what doesn't count, and you have to age up everything. Where it's like everything in the show that happened in the '90s happened, except everybody has cell phones now. Like this had that a little bit.
Yeah, I was thinking of Arkham too, where it's like the Arkham games take certain things, but then also like avoid other things, and it's just kind of
yeah. So that in Arkham,
who knows what happens?
So that in Arkham Knight they can get away with the big villain in that being revealed to be a character that they've never introduced earlier, that they're just going to do flashbacks to in that game. So that they're like, well, it's still going to be a cool reveal because fans who know who that is, it's like that's not how that works, you guys. You have a totally other continuity. You have to. It's like the whole does Uncle Ben exist or not in MCU Spider-Man? Like, nah, you gotta have context. You gotta have background. You can't be like, we've done this origin before, so everybody knows. We don't know. You could have changed it. How do we know you didn't? You changed other things.
Well, and the character in those movies doesn't act like Uncle Ben. Like, that tragedy happened. Like, and if it did happen, it had zero effect on him. Maybe he's just a happy-go-lucky kid.
You made Gank Ned Leeds, so, like, anything could happen.
Yeah. No, but you're totally right about like the changing of the history thing, and you kind of have to forget stuff because like they do things like make Harry the Black Goblin instead of the second Green Goblin.
What was that about?
Was kind of weird too. Yeah.
Yeah, that was really bizarre, especially because Green Goblin never shows up again.
Yeah.
Like I thought maybe like they would both show up, and they did that because they wouldn't both be Green Goblin, but then no.
I couldn't. No.
Why isn't he just like a Hobgoblin, maybe, if we had to make him a different one?
And then why not Hobgoblin? Like, why is he also introducing new, like, names and things? Because, to my recollection, there's not anything called the Black Goblin, but I don't know my Spider-Man as well as you guys do.
The Red Goblin is a thing that was done during Slot's run, I think, where Norman Osborn gets the Carnage symbiote.
Oh, yeah.
That.
Mm-hmm.
I
thought that was... Or was that, like, right at the end of Slot? I think that was right at the end of that.
Yeah, I think it was.
And now we have the Goblin Queen. Just too many goblins.
Austin, when I got to that panel where they reveal Harry is the Black Goblin, all I had in my brain was the voice in the '90s Fox Spider-Man show. It was like, "I'm the real Goblin, the Black Goblin."
I was the same exact thing. So.
Did you really?
Literally the same exact thing.
Justice is blind, no longer.
Dude, did you guys also think, speaking of Harry, the way that he died in this was super lame?
How did he die? I don't remember.
Yes, it hits the Spider-Man 3 death.
Yeah, so he is like standing between.
I remember not being able to tell what was happening. It was just something. He's dead.
So
yeah, he
Dr.
gets stabbed by Doc Ock because Doc Ock tries to stab Ben Reilly.
Yeah, he's trying to kill like Peter or Ben Reilly, one of the clones at the time, and then Harry just goes no and steps in front of him and gets stabbed.
It was like a Smallville death.
No.
Like, I don't know, the way Harry Osborn goes out in, before they did all that One More Day crap where he came back, but
yeah.
But when he died, for the first time, supposedly for good, that like story is awesome. It's by DeMatteis in his Spectacular Spider-Man run. It's one of my favorite Spider-Man stories, and like, I don't know, just seeing him die in such a like unceremonious way, I thought was very strange.
Well, it's kind of like Gwen, right? Like
Yeah.
Gwen also gets a pretty lame death. Like
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The blade that pierced his body came from Dr. Octopus.
I'm looking at one of the panels now, and it just made me think of. I didn't like any of the new costumes they introduced in this.
I didn't either. And I'm so glad you brought that up, because issue to issue I was like, why does it look like this? Why does it look like this? And then it seems like they're all different, and they could have been cool and different. I didn't like any of them, but it seemed like the only reason that they changed decade to decade is so that we could have the kind of like pseudo Spider-Verse in his brain thing in 2010, because I thought that was the other thing 2010 was doing was, okay, you have Superior Spider-Man, and we're going to do that with Miles Morales, which I thought was a fine idea, if Miles has to be there. And then we're going to have, well, we got to have a nod to Spider-Verse, because that's huge, and I got a movie that won an Oscar, so how do you get Spider-Verse in there? It's all the versions of him throughout the decades that you've seen, they'll all come together in his brain, and that's the only reason it's a different costume issue to issue. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. It is.
And that whole brain thing is just weird in general. All these villains you haven't seen in the book show up, including Venom, who doesn't exist in this universe because he's Kraven.
Yeah, that was weird. And this is like a real minor nitpick, but I just thought it was really strange that we get this huge panel of all these villains that Doc Ock has brought together in Peter's mind, and then right after that, Peter says, with what army? And then you see all of the Spider-Mans, but I'm like, well, that one. Like,
the one in front of you, Spider-Man.
It's right there. Like, I get what you're doing. It's like, I have an army too, but you don't say you and what army, because that one. When I'm jumping around, but when I was just looking at panels from the first issue again, when Norman Osborn and Harry drive up to school, was anybody else expecting I'm something of a scientist myself? Because there was at least one line from that movie in that scene. I forget what it was. I'm looking for it right now, but I kept waiting for him to say that.
Yeah, they are very similar scenes.
It's very true.
But absolutely creepier, because he's like, I've been following your career.
I'm something of a follower myself.
And I think that scene later where he's pretending to be Peter's friend, and then it turns out that he already knows that he's Spider-Man and all that, that's like genuinely unnerving. That was a really good scene.
Are you talking about the scene at the bar?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that scene's great. Where he has all the like pumpkin bombs rigged, and if Peter like freaks out, he'll set them all off and kill everyone.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's great.
That's pretty good. Mm-hmm. And then when Peter's like, well, you're going to kill your own kid too, and Norman just completely ignores that part and says nothing about it. He's just like, okay, so if you don't want to die, you should leave now and do the thing I told you to. That's great.
Harry is weak. Family is for weaklings, Peter.
We're at an hour, so we can go ahead and wrap this up. But real quick, there was one more little point I wanted to make from way earlier when we were talking about all of that first Clone Saga stuff with Miles Warren. And, I mean, both sets of the Clone Saga stuff was really weird. But the thing with, like we were talking about earlier, with the three clones / people in the like cloning chamber thing. I don't understand why he uses the same like chamber thing for a real person. Like, you'd think that he'd have Gwen Stacy stashed someplace else. I just didn't understand why it was almost like just so they could make the reveal that, oh, that's not a clone, it's actually Gwen Stacy. Like, I didn't buy the setting of that. It was really strange.
Well, I thought it was weird too, because he's like, I kept her in there until me and Gwen could be together. I'm like, well, why can't you now?
When was that gonna be?
What's stopping you?
And everything about that is just kind of icky, where it's like, why would you even think that she would want to be with you? And
that's a thing with Miles Warren from the comics. Like, you know, he's obsessed with Gwen and cloned her in the 90s. So that's kind of what, you know, he was referencing. His original motivation as the Jackal is that he has like a creepy, like, you know, crush on Gwen. So I didn't mind that stuff, but I in this universe he doesn't even seem to have ever been the Jackal. He's just kind of a scientist that Gwen and Peter had as a teacher, and he's Gwen works for him.
But I guess I'm just thinking, like, because I don't remember, I've only read bits and pieces of that, and I don't remember how exactly that whole thing goes in the comics, but it seems like making a clone of her that you think maybe you could get to fall in love with you makes a lot more sense than get the real one and hope that she'll fall in. Like, what makes you think that that's gonna work? Like, at least a clone you might be able to program in some way.
Yeah, no, it's a weird idea. I don't know what he was thinking.
That was the bit of it I didn't really understand. And that was one of the issues I had, not to talk in circles, about the how few issues this was handled in, is you get a lot of throwaway character motivations like that, where you're wondering, why is this villain so on about this? And they'll get one speech bubble that explains it, and then we're moving on. And we do that with Doc Ock, and we do that with Miles Warren, and like even when Harry decides he hates Peter, that's handled in one panel. It's just like, this is why I'm mad at you right now.
Yeah. Again, they just kind of rely on your prior knowledge to know, like, oh, Miles Warren has this, like the example we're talking about. Oh, he has this like long-standing thing. So yeah, that makes sense.
Economy. What else do you guys want to bring up about this before we call it a day?
Let's see. I think we were pretty thorough. Do you have anything, Austin?
Nothing that's coming to mind.
Well, thank you guys for reading it with me.
Yeah, no, it was really fun. I quite enjoyed this. I hope we didn't come off as like super critical of it. But I think it's, you know, if you're a Spider-Man fan, it's worth checking out despite some of the flaws we identified.
No, this book is amazing. Not everything in it is quite spectacular, but there's web of ideas that go all throughout the book. And while it ultimately doesn't come together, it is superior to a lot of other modern Spider-Man stories.
Well done. I'm really sad that you got to superior, because I was going to tack on to Jeff Loeb. I'm sorry, Jeff Loeb. Anyway, everybody, thanks a lot for watching. Hope you enjoyed our review of Spider-Man Life Story. If you have read this book, leave your comments. Let us know what you think of it, and we'll try to be back with you again in the not-too-distant future for another Comic Vault. Dan, thanks for joining us. It's been a long time. I've missed you, buddy.
I've missed you, too. Thanks for having me, guys. And we'll have to do another book soon.
And next time, there's going to be carnage.
You shouldn't have said that. I will make sure that the next thing has Carnage in it.
We can do that new Carnage one. It's like
Absolute Carnage.
Yeah.
I bought all of that because I collect Carnage, and I haven't read any of it. I think I read part of the first issue, and it seemed fun, but I haven't read any beyond that. And I don't know how well that's going to read in a vacuum, because they had, you know, a million side books with that. And I don't know if that's one of those events that you could just read the main thing or not, or if you got to read frickin' everything. You know, do I have to read Carnage Deadpool? I don't know. I'm pretty sure that's where that version of Spider Carnage that we talked about the other day shows up, though.
Oh, yeah. Okay, then if that doesn't read well in a vacuum, we'll do Venom 2, the commentary, next time.
Don't say that! I don't want to have to buy it at full price! I was waiting for it to come down a little bit. I don't like that movie.
No, it's going to be released to the $5 bin. You're good.
Oh, you think like by the time we make another video?
Yeah.
We'll make $1 billion on home video by being in $5 bins somehow.
Yeah, what's like Morbius? It's just going to be released straight to the $5 bin. That's what it'll say on the trailers.
That Morbius movie looks so bad that I cannot wait to see it.
See, I am so out on left field on this. I don't think it looks bad. I think it looks kind of generic. But every time I see that trailer, I'm just like, I get why everybody's saying this looks really dumb, but I don't know what else you would do with the Morbius movie. Like, I'm not imagining the better Morbius movie.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree in that it just kind of looks boring. It looks like Dracula Untold but with Morbius, and is written by the people who wrote Dracula Untold.
Now that's unfortunate. That's enough of a reason to not go, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, got to keep the Spider-Verse alive, you know. Sony needs our money, and I'm gonna give it to them.
What I'm and I won't give it to them. Sony deserves a better class of viewer, and I'm gonna give it to them.
Sony needs a better marketing team, considering for like the last 5 months they've had a Craven the Hunter movie Twitter account, and their profile picture is a black screen with just like Times New Roman text that says Craven the Hunter.
Just use a comic book picture of the character.
Well, and I'm not convinced that movie's going to get made after Morbius bombs, or if they're, I don't know how far into production they are, maybe it will. I don't know.
I'm not convinced Morbius will bomb, because nothing surprises me anymore. I think just the stuff that they've tacked on in that trailer to make it look relevant might be enough to get some of the people that like Venom to go see it. I mean, they've really confused everybody as to what continuity that's even in, and I couldn't tell you what's going on with that, because it looks like it could be in at least 3, if not 4, different continuities, or all of them at once.
There's no worry. It's an awful lot of them.
And I don't want to give anything away for people that haven't seen it yet. I don't want to give it away for anybody that hasn't seen it yet, but I've seen the new Spider-Man movie, and I still don't know what continuity Morbius is going to be in. Like, I really thought getting to the end of that, maybe I would have a sense of it. Nope! Still do not know what's going on with that.
I hope that Sony does a very large and indulgent Endgame style movie with all of their, like, terrible villain spin-off characters, and they act like they've accomplished something over the course of like 10 years. You know
I hope they only make Venom and Morbius movies and then make that movie. They introduced like 18 more, where it's like, we were gonna make a Madam Web movie, but we just saved it for no Spider-Man Endgame.
And I love how, like, at that point, like, Sony's Endgame would just basically be half different colored Venoms, because that's what he's going to fight in every movie, right?
Yeah, the second one set up Toxin, so I guess we're just fighting Toxin next time.
Yeah, and who cares about that? Like, how is, at the very least, when you save Carnage for your third movie if they're all gonna be symbiotes? I don't understand that. It's like, how can we trump Carnage? Oh, we can't do that. Okay.
Well, maybe the next one will be Venom v. Morbius. And then they'll fight each other and then fight Toxin. They'll team up together. They're like, oh, this Toxin guy.
That's really funny. At that point, they're not even looking at MCU or even DCEU. They're like, we'll go with Godzilla.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be like they're fighting each other while scientists make Toxin, and then Toxin will burst out of a laboratory. And then they'll be like, uh-oh. Let's go fight that guy.
See, they keep hinting that at some point Venom is actually, like, one of those movies is actually going to have Spider-Man in it. I want them to make a trilogy about that not happening called Spider-Man Not Yet.
I feel like Sony is going to pretend it's happening for a long time. It's never going to happen at this point.
I mean, it might.
The new Spider-Man movie, but I have seen things from it, and the post-credit scene is hysterical.
I don't want to talk about that. That belongs in a different movie. Anyway, everybody, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you again real soon. I was Captain Logan. This was Austin, the Day Ghost, and Spider Dan Torrey.
Bye, everybody.
Don't copy my move.
Later, folks.